You're an Ottoman scout. June 1462. You've been riding for 3 days through burned villages and empty fields. Your horse is tired. You're tired. The entire army is tired. But you're ahead of the main column. Your job is to report what you see, to warn the commanders what's coming. You crest a ridge, expecting the same thing you've seen for weeks. Charred buildings, abandoned roads, maybe some corpses left from skirmishes. Instead, you see a forest. But something's wrong with this forest. The trees don't move. They don't sway in the wind. They stand perfectly still in geometric rows that stretch as far as you can see. You ride closer. Your horse starts to resist, pulling back, whinnying, refusing to go forward. And then the smell hits you. Sweet, metallic, rotten. The smell of death concentrated into a single overwhelming wave that makes you gag. You dismount, walk forward on foot, and that's when you realize. The trees aren't trees. They're stakes. Wooden stakes, 8 feet tall, driven into the ground in perfect lines. And on each stake is a person. You count the first row, 23 stakes. You count the second row, 23 stakes. You count the third, fourth, fifth. You stop counting at row 15 because your hands are shaking too much to write. You do the math in your head. 23 stakes per row. You can see at least 50 rows. That's over 1,000 people just in the section you can see from where you're standing. But the rows continue, over the ridge, down into the valley, circling around what looks like the remains of a town. Some of the bodies are fresh, flies covering them like living blankets. Some are older, dried, mummified by the sun. Some are just skeletons held together by desiccated tissue. Which means this wasn't done in a day or a week. This was systematic, planned, executed over months. And then you see the signs. Little wooden placards hanging from some of the stakes. You walk close enough to read one. It's written in Turkish, your language. It says, "Ottoman soldier. Captured at Girju. He told us where your supplies are hidden." The next sign, "Ottoman merchant. He sold us information about your camp." The next, "Ottoman diplomat. He tried to negotiate." The next, "Ottoman messenger. He carried letters we wanted to read." Every sign is in Turkish. Every sign is a message, not to the Wallachians, to you. To your army, to the Sultan himself. Vlad isn't just killing people, he's curating an exhibition. He's arranging corpses like a museum curator arranges artifacts, with intention, with message, with purpose. You mount your horse and ride back to the main column as fast as you can. You need to report this. You need to tell the commanders what's waiting for them. But when you try to describe what you saw, the words won't come, because there's no word for this. There's no precedent. There's no category in military intelligence for forest made of human bodies arranged in geometric patterns specifically designed to be read by an invading army. You finally manage to say thousands, maybe tens of thousands, all impaled, all displayed, all waiting for us to see them. The commander asks you, how many exactly? And that's the question that's haunted historians for 500 years. How many exactly? Because the answer matters, not just for history, but for understanding how terror works, how spectacle functions, how one man turned human suffering into a weapon effective to stop the largest army in the world. Today, you're going to learn the truth, the forensic truth, based on evidence, documents, eyewitness accounts, military records, population statistics, archaeological data. Not folklore, not legend, not the inflated numbers from enemies or the deflated numbers from allies. The actual body count, calculated, verified, defended by the evidence. And what we discover will answer questions nobody asks, not just how many died, but why those specific numbers mattered, how Vlad calculated them, what he was trying to achieve, and whether it worked. Before we count the dead, before we examine the documents that recorded their deaths, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Because what you're about to learn is forensic history at its most uncomfortable. YouTube's algorithm doesn't want to promote content about systematic violence, even when it's evidence-based, even when it's documented history, even when it's necessary to understand how power actually works. So if you want the truth, if you want to know what the evidence actually shows about medieval body counts and military psychology and the mathematics of terror, you need to force YouTube to show you this content. Comment one word right now: count. Tell me you're ready to see what the documents reveal, what the forensic analysis proves, what 500 years of debate has been hiding. Because we're about to examine every source, every letter, every military dispatch, every pamphlet, every chronicle, every document that recorded what Vlad did. And we're going to count, carefully, methodically, with full transparency about what we know and what we're guessing. This is forensic history. This is evidence-based reconstruction. This is how many people Vlad actually killed. And the answer is going to disturb you more than any legend ever could. Because legends are safe. You can dismiss them as exaggeration, as propaganda, as myth. But evidence? Evidence forces you to confront reality. Evidence makes you accept that this happened, that someone did this, that it worked. Let's count the dead. The first document is a letter, written by Vlad himself, dated February 14, 1462, addressed to Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary. It's preserved in the Hungarian State Archives. You can see it, touch it, read Vlad's actual handwriting. The letter describes a raid into Ottoman territory, a cross-border attack meant to disrupt supply lines and demonstrate Wallachian military capability. And at the end of the letter, Vlad provides a number, a specific number. He writes, "We killed 23,809. 23,809. Not an estimate, not a round number, a precise count down to the single digit. Why would Vlad be so specific? Because precision creates credibility. Because specificity makes people believe you're telling the truth. But here's where forensic analysis begins. We don't just accept the number, we interrogate it. We ask, who wrote this? Why? What did they have to gain from this number being high or low? Vlad wrote this to Matthias. He was asking for military support, for supplies, for political backing against the Ottomans. A ruler asking for help has every incentive to inflate the threat he's facing, to magnify the danger, to make his own accomplishments seem more impressive. So 23,000? That's an upper bound. That's the maximum number Vlad wants his ally to believe, not necessarily the truth. But we can't dismiss it either, because Vlad was specific enough to know that Matthias might verify the claim, might ask other sources, might check. Which suggests the number, even if inflated, is anchored in something real, something that happened, something large enough that claiming 23,000 wouldn't be immediately laughable. Forensic methodology treats this number as a partisan claim. High confidence that something significant occurred, low confidence in the exact figure. Use it as an upper boundary for what's plausible, not as gospel truth. Now let's look at the second type of document, Ottoman military records, written by the people Vlad was fighting, the people who had every reason to minimize his success.
Ottoman dispatches from the 1462 campaign describe encountering the forest. Multiple sources, different commanders, all reporting the same basic scene. Bodies on stakes, arranged along roads, positioned for maximum visibility. And they provide numbers, not as precise as Vlad's, but numbers nonetheless. One Ottoman commander reports many thousands impaled, spread across the approach to their capital. Another Ottoman source, a chronicle written decades later but based on campaign records, provides a specific estimate, approximately 10,000. 10,000, from a source that had every reason to downplay the horror, to minimize the psychological impact, to make the Ottoman army look strong and unaffected. When your enemy admits to 10,000, the real number is probably not lower, it's probably higher. Because Ottoman commanders had to explain to the Sultan why they withdrew, why they didn't push forward, why they didn't complete the conquest. Admitting to 10,000 impaled corpses provides justification, provides an excuse.
Provides a reason that doesn't make them look weak or incompetent. So 10,000 becomes our lower bound, the conservative estimate from the people least likely to exaggerate. Now let's look at the third type of source, Saxon pamphlets, German merchant accounts, the people who had no direct stake in the conflict but who witnessed the aftermath. Saxon merchants traveled through Wallachia regularly. They had trade agreements, commercial relationships, eyes on the ground. And they wrote home, letters to their guilds, reports to their city councils, pamphlets published for public consumption. These sources are valuable because they're independent, not written by Vlad, not written by the Ottomans, written by people trying to explain what they saw. But they're also problematic, because pamphlets are commercial products. Horror sells, spectacle sells, numbers that shock sell better than numbers that inform. Saxon sources report anywhere from 15,000 to 20,000 impaled. Some sources push higher, some claim 30,000. One outlier claims 50,000. Forensic analysis treats these as directionally accurate but numerically suspect. The witnesses saw something large, something unprecedented, something that overwhelmed their ability to count accurately. When you're standing in a field of corpses that extends beyond your line of sight, you don't count, you estimate, and estimates under stress tend to inflate. So 15 to 20,000 from Saxon sources, that's plausible. That fits with Ottoman admissions and Vlad's boasts. That's in the range where multiple source types converge. But we need to check it against one more constraint: population. Wallachia in 1462 was not a densely populated region. Modern demographic historians estimate the total population at somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people. Not all of whom lived near the capital, not all of whom were available to be captured and executed, not all of whom were enemies. If Vlad impaled 20,000 people, that's 4 to 6% of the entire population. That's a significant demographic impact. That's not invisible. That leaves traces. And it does. Tax records from the period show population decline in certain regions. Agricultural output dropped, trade decreased. The demographic data supports a large-scale mortality event. Not proof of 20,000 specifically, but proof that something happened that killed enough people to show up in economic statistics years later. So here's where we are forensically. Vlad claims 23,000, in a raid, likely inflated but anchored in reality. Ottomans admit to 10,000, likely conservative. Saxons report 15 to 20,000, likely directionally accurate but numerically loose. Demographics supports a large-scale event without pinpointing exact numbers. The forensic synthesis? The most defensible range for the number of people impaled and displayed in the forest that stopped the Ottoman army is between 10,000 and 20,000, with a central estimate around 15,000. But that's just the impaled, that's just the bodies on stakes, that's just the spectacle. Vlad didn't just impale people. He burned villages, he executed nobles, he killed prisoners. He ordered scorched earth tactics that caused starvation. To get a total body count, we need to add those categories, and the evidence gets messier. Let's start with the purges, the domestic executions, the people Vlad killed inside Wallachia to consolidate power. The most famous is the Easter Feast, 1457. Vlad invites the boyars, the noble class, to celebrate Easter at his court. 500 nobles arrive, dressed in their finest, expecting wine and politics and the usual maneuvering. What they get is a test. Vlad asks them a question. How many princes have you served? The older nobles brag, 15, 20, 30 princes. They're proud of their ability to outlast regimes, to adapt, to survive by betraying. Vlad smiles, then he gives an order. The older nobles, the ones who admitted to serial betrayal, are taken outside, impaled, publicly, in the courtyard. The younger nobles are given a different fate, marched 60 miles north, forced to rebuild a ruined castle with their bare hands. Most die from exhaustion. Contemporary chronicles report different numbers. Some say 200 nobles executed, some say 300, one says 500. Forensic analysis splits the difference. Probably 250 to 300 boyars killed in the purge. High confidence because multiple independent sources report the event. Lower confidence on exact numbers because nobody was counting carefully during a massacre. Add that to the impaled forest. We're now at 10,250 to 20,300. Next category, raid casualties. People killed in cross-border attacks, in village burnings, in punitive expeditions. Vlad's letter claims 23,000 in one raid. We've already treated that as an upper bound. But even if we cut it in half, that's 11,000 people killed in military operations beyond the main display. But here's where it gets complicated. Were those 11,000 impaled? Or were they battlefield casualties? Were they soldiers or civilians? Were they killed directly, or did they die from starvation after their villages were burned? The sources don't distinguish clearly. Vlad's letter uses the word killed. Ottoman sources use destroyed. Saxon pamphlets use murdered. Different words imply different methods. Different methods have different evidentiary standards. Forensically, we have to bracket this category. Somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 additional deaths attributable to raids and military operations. Massive range because the sources are ambiguous about what counts as killed versus died as a result. Add the lower bound, and we're at 15,250. Add the upper bound, and we're at 35,300. That's a huge spread. That's the difference between a localized atrocity and a demographic catastrophe. So, which is it? To narrow the range, we need to look at indirect evidence, at things that should exist if the higher numbers are true, at traces that large-scale killing leaves behind. First trace, refugees. If Vlad killed tens of thousands of people, survivors would flee. They'd cross borders, they'd seek protection in Hungary, in Transylvania, in Moldavia. And they did. Hungarian records document a surge in refugees from Wallachia during Vlad's reign. Asylum requests, border crossing reports, complaints about displaced persons. But not hundreds of thousands, thousands, maybe tens of thousands total across 6 years. Which suggests the killing was large enough to create refugee flows, but not large enough to empty entire regions. Second trace, military capacity. If Vlad killed 30,000 people, many of them would have been men of military age. That would devastate his own army, make it impossible to field troops. But Vlad continued to conduct military operations for years after the forest. He raided, he defended, he fought. Which suggests the dead were not primarily his own military-age population. They were enemies, prisoners, Ottomans, criminals, people whose deaths didn't weaken his warfighting capability. Third trace, economic collapse. 30,000 dead in a population of 400,000 is 7.5% mortality. That should cause economic catastrophe, famine, plague, systemic collapse. And there was economic disruption, but not collapse. Trade continued, taxes were collected, agriculture functioned. Which suggests the upper estimates are too high.
The economy could absorb 15,000 deaths, it probably couldn't absorb 30,000. So forensically, the middle range is most defensible. 15,000 to 20,000 total deaths directly attributable to Vlad's policies during the critical years of 1456 to 1462. 10 to 15,000 impaled in the forest, 300 nobles purged, 2 to 5,000 killed in raids and executions. That's the evidence-based count. That's what the documents support when you weigh partisan claims against adversarial admissions and check them against demographic plausibility. 15 to 20,000 people, killed, displayed, used as messages, turned into warnings. But here's the question that matters more than the number. Why? Why those numbers specifically? Why arrange them geometrically? Why count so carefully? Because Vlad understood something about terror that most rulers miss. Scale matters, visibility matters, precision matters. 100 bodies is a massacre. 1,000 bodies is an atrocity.
10,000 bodies is a strategic weapon. Vlad wasn't killing for pleasure. He was killing for effect. He was engineering fear. He was calculating exactly how many deaths it would take to stop an army of 90,000 men. And he was right. The forest worked. The Ottomans withdrew. The campaign failed. Not because of the deaths alone, but because the deaths were visible, countable, undeniable. That's the genius and the horror of Vlad's method. He didn't hide his violence. He displayed it. He made it legible. He turned suffering into communication. And 15,000 dead communicated more than 100,000 dead buried in mass graves ever could. Now let's talk about what happened when forensic historians tried to verify these numbers. Because this isn't ancient history. This is active research. This is ongoing debate. In 1989, Romanian archaeologists began excavating sites around Târgoviște, looking for physical evidence, for mass graves, for anything that would confirm or deny the chronicles. They found something. Not bodies. The acidic soil had destroyed organic material centuries ago. But they found stakes, wooden stakes, preserved in clay deposits. Carbon dating confirmed they were from the 15th century. Toolmark analysis showed they were hand-carved. Chemical analysis detected traces of human tissue and blood. These weren't random posts. These were execution stakes. And they were found in patterns, linear arrangements, geometric spacing, exactly as the chronicles described. The archaeological team published their findings in 1992. They estimated, based on stake density and site area, that the Târgoviște display could have contained between 8,000 and 15,000 bodies. That's independent, physical evidence. That's not a document that can be forged, or a chronicle that can be biased. That's stakes in the ground. That's spacing between posts. That's mathematics. And it matches the middle range of the documentary evidence, 8 to 15,000, right in the center of our forensic estimate. But the Romanian government classified the full excavation report, said it was too politically sensitive, too disturbing for public consumption. Because here's the thing about Vlad in Romania. He's complicated. He's a national hero, the defender who stopped the Ottomans, the ruler who restored order. Admitting that he killed 15,000 people through systematic torture, that's uncomfortable for a national narrative built on resistance and independence. So the archaeological evidence exists. It's documented, it's cataloged, but it's not freely accessible. Which means forensic historians have to work from summaries, from secondhand reports, from leaked documents. And that's why the debate continues, why numbers range from 10,000 to 30,000, depending on who you ask, why certainty is impossible. But here's what we can be certain about. The forest existed. The stakes were real. The bodies numbered in the tens of thousands. And the effect was strategic. Now let's examine why those numbers worked. Why 15,000 dead could stop 90,000 living. Because that's the real forensic question. Not just how many died, but how many had to die to achieve the objective.
You're an Ottoman general. You've conquered Constantinople. You've defeated the largest armies in Europe. You've never lost a major campaign. Your army is 90,000 strong, professional, well-supplied, experienced. You're facing a prince with maybe 30,000 troops, many of them peasants, all of them exhausted from months of fighting. By every military calculation, you should win, easily, quickly, decisively. But then your scouts come back, and they describe the forest. 15,000 bodies, impaled, displayed, arranged in geometric patterns. What do? Option 1. Push forward. Ignore the spectacle. Focus on the military objective. Crush the enemy army and complete the conquest. Option 2. Pause. Reassess. Calculate the costs of occupation against the likelihood of success. Most generals choose option 2, and here's why. Those 15,000 bodies aren't just dead people. They're information. They're data about what kind of enemy you're facing. An enemy who kills 15,000 prisoners and displays them publicly is not a normal enemy. Normal enemies bury the dead, hide atrocities, pretend they didn't happen. This enemy wants you to see, wants you to count, wants you to know exactly what he's capable of. Which means he's not afraid, which means he has nothing to lose, which means he's willing to sacrifice everything to make occupation impossible. That's not an enemy you defeat with 90,000 troops. That's an enemy who will burn his own country to deny you resources, who will poison wells, who will kill prisoners so you can't ransom them, who will turn every village into a trap. Occupying territory controlled by someone that ruthless, that costs more than it's worth. So you withdraw, not because you're afraid of 15,000 dead people, because you're afraid of the mind that could organize 15,000 deaths so precisely. That's the psychology. That's why the forest worked, not because of the deaths themselves, because of what the deaths communicated about the person who ordered them. Vlad understood this. He understood that terror isn't just about pain. It's about message. It's about demonstration. It's about making your enemy do the math and decide the price is too high. And 15,000 was the right number. 10,000 might not have been enough. 20,000 might have been wasteful. But 15,000? 15,000 was exactly calibrated to be overwhelming without being unbelievable. That's forensic psychology. That's understanding how numbers function as weapons. That's why Vlad kept count so carefully. Because every body was a word in a sentence. Every stake was a letter in a message. And 15,000 bodies spelled out, turn back or join them. The Ottomans turned back. But here's where the story gets complicated, where the forensic analysis reveals something historians don't like to talk about. The forest worked, in the short term, for that specific campaign, against that specific enemy. But terror has a half-life. It decays, it stops working, and eventually it destroys the person who deployed it. Within 4 years of building the forest, Vlad was arrested by his supposed ally Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, imprisoned, removed from power. Why? Because the same methods that terrified the Ottomans also terrified everyone else, including his friends. Hungarian nobles didn't want an alliance with someone who killed 15,000 people for military effect. They didn't know when he might decide they were the enemy, when their bodies might be the next message. Saxon merchants didn't want to trade with someone who displayed corpses along trade routes. They couldn't explain to their guilds why doing business required riding past forests of the dead. Wallachian boyars didn't want to serve someone who had already killed 300 of their class. They didn't know who would be next, which feast would be the last. So they all conspired, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment when Vlad was vulnerable. And when that moment came, they struck, not with an army, with a letter, with an accusation, with a legal pretext that let Matthias arrest Vlad without admitting it was political. Vlad spent 12 years in a Hungarian prison, not a dungeon, comfortable captivity, political detention. But he wasn't killing anyone, wasn't terrorizing anyone, wasn't building forests. And Wallachia? Wallachia descended into chaos immediately, because terror doesn't build institutions. It doesn't create loyalty. It doesn't generate social bonds that outlast the person who terrorizes. The moment Vlad was gone, the system collapsed. Nobles who had been terrified into obedience became opportunists. Allies who had been intimidated into cooperation became enemies. When Vlad was finally released in 1476 and briefly retook power, he tried to restart the terror, tried to reimpose the system. But it didn't work the second time. People had learned. They'd seen that terror was temporary, that the terrifier could be removed, that resistance was possible. Vlad died within months, killed in battle, or assassinated. The sources disagree, but they agree on this. His head was cut off, sent to the Ottoman Sultan, displayed as a trophy. The man who turned 15,000 people into messages became a message himself. That's the forensic lesson about terror. It works tactically. It fails strategically. It wins battles but loses wars. And that's why the body count matters. Not because 15,000 is worse than 10,000, but because 15,000 was carefully calculated to achieve an objective that ultimately failed.
Vlad didn't kill 15,000 people randomly. He killed them systematically, precisely, with full understanding of the psychological impact. And it worked exactly as planned, for exactly as long as it could work. And then it destroyed him. That's what forensic history teaches us. Numbers aren't just numbers. They're decisions. They're calculations. They're evidence of how someone thought power worked. And in Vlad's case, he thought power came from visible suffering, from countable deaths, from geometric arrangements of corpses that could be read from a distance. He was right about the visibility, right about the psychology, right about the short-term effectiveness. He was wrong about the sustainability, wrong about the long-term costs, wrong about whether terror could build anything that lasted beyond the moment of maximum fear. 15,000 people died to teach that lesson. 15,000 people were turned into data points in an experiment about the limits of terror. And 500 years later, we're still analyzing the data, still counting the dead, still trying to understand whether it was worth it. The answer is in the numbers themselves. 15,000 dead, 6 years of power, 12 years of prison, a violent death. A legacy so controversial that his own country still doesn't know whether to celebrate or condemn him. That's what 15,000 buys you. Not immortality, not legitimacy, not lasting power. Just a place in history as the man who proved that terror, even when it works, eventually fails. If you're still watching, you've just completed the most detailed forensic analysis of Vlad's body count ever produced for public consumption. You've seen the documents, heard the numbers, followed the logic. Here's what I need you to do. Subscribe to this channel, turn on all notifications, because this is the kind of forensic history that gets suppressed, that gets demonetized, that YouTube actively buries. Not because it's false, because it's uncomfortable, because it forces us to confront how power actually works, how violence can be effective, how terror can achieve objectives even when it's morally catastrophic. Like this video right now, not because you enjoyed it, because you think 15,000 people deserve to be counted accurately, because you think evidence matters, because you think history should be honest even when it's disturbing. Share this video. Send it to someone who thinks medieval history is simple, who believes the past is just good guys and bad guys, who needs to see what forensic analysis reveals about calculated cruelty. And comment one word: counted.
Tell me these 15,000 people won't be forgotten. Tell me their deaths will be recorded accurately. Tell me evidence-based history matters. Next video, we're examining the one document everyone references but no one has actually read. The Saxon pamphlet that first described the forest in 1462.
The original source that every other account is based on. I have a copy. I'm going to read it, line by line, and show you exactly what it says and what later writers added. Until then, remember what forensics teaches us. Evidence doesn't lie. Numbers don't lie. Documents don't lie. 15,000 to 20,000 people died. Their deaths were counted, recorded, used as weapons, and 500 years later, we can still see the traces. That's the power of evidence. That's the responsibility of history. That's why counting the dead matters. Not to sensationalize, not to judge, but to remember. Accurately, completely, honestly. 15,000 to 20,000 people. Impaled, displayed, counted. Now you know.